Hey guys, it's Friday, and as always with every Friday, it's time to talk about how important it is to make time to make things. But really, if you've been watching these videos for a while, you'll know that it's really not about making things for the sake of making things. It's always been about the process and the journey of making things. That journey that can restore us, or calm us, or soothe us. But what happens if it doesn't? What happens if we don't feel like making anything at all? Thanks for being here. I am Felicia from SweetGeorgia, and this is Taking Back Friday. This is a series that I started a couple of years ago to talk about how important it is to make time to make things. And I spend a lot of time talking about yarn and knitting, weaving, spinning, and the fiber arts. If you are interested in any of these fiber arts, I really welcome you to subscribe to this channel to see all of our tutorials and videos about the fiber arts. Now, this week I want to talk about something that came up over the holidays in our community forums over at the School of SweetGeorgia. And I was thinking about this for many weeks now. But we as knitters and makers, we often talk about the meditative and the restorative qualities of knitting or spinning or working with your hands. It can be so relaxing and help you cope with stress. But in this intense time of difficulty and challenge in this past year, maybe you haven't felt like picking up the needles at all. And this came up in a discussion on our forums about the Make 9 and making your best 9, and how some of us didn't actually complete the 9 things that we had tried to make, and how we felt about that. I don't think it's a surprise that we often tie our value and our self-worth to the physical manifestation of our yarn work, our finished objects. And so when there are no finished objects to show, we might feel this sense of failure. And so it might not even be related to the ongoing challenges and issues happening in the greater world right now, things that we have no control over. But it might be related to stress that we're experiencing at home or with our families or, even with our health. I know of a few friends who are going through some challenging times with hand injuries and ongoing pain. And for myself, I long had this ongoing issue with my hands. Either it was spinning and causing problems with my thumb and causing pain while I was spinning, and then there was a couple of years where my arms and my hands would go tingly and numb after knitting just a few rows. That's started to happen again as well, and I know it's perfectly related to posture and to stress, but it's something that I can't necessarily easily fix. And so that feeling of being less productive, having less output to show, it feels like we get more and more disconnected from our craft and possibly even the community, and just lose interest in doing it all together. I know that after the birth of my son about 7 years ago, I went through quite a long phase where I didn't knit a single thing. And, there was ongoing reasons why, my wrists were swollen, so that prevented me from knitting. And the second was that I just didn't feel like it. The weight of being a new mom, totally sleep deprived all the time. It was really hard to push through all of that. And so even the thought of picking up my knitting needles made me tired. I couldn't even bear to knit a few stitches. Let alone having to stop and pick colors or wind skeins into balls, cast on, any of that. None of it interested me at all. And you would think that, as a new mom, somebody who needs some me time, somebody who needs some calming and relaxing 10 minutes a day, some relief, that would be the place where you could go to find that relief. But for me personally, it was just more mentally taxing than I could handle. And so now, what if you are in a situation where you have lost your motivation or your mojo for making things? Like, what if you don't feel like making anything right now at all? So I have a few thoughts on this, and so there's a couple of things that I wanted to suggest or recommend or see if they might help you in your situation. So the first thing is, don't push yourself. If you don't feel like making anything, don't make anything right now. If you just don't feel like you can muster up the energy to do any of that stuff, then you don't need to do that. I think very often we tie our identities as makers to the things that we have made. And so when there's that disconnect, when you haven't made anything, you feel like you've lost your identity as a maker. But I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think it's very often you just need a break. You need a bit of time. You need a bit of time to rest and recover. The second thing that I can suggest that you do is to switch crafts for something different, something new, something fresh. I know that in that time when I didn't necessarily feel like doing any knitting, I actually switched over and did a ton of quilting. And all of a sudden, quilting really captured my attention because of the ability to mix and combine different colors in a new and completely different way. You know, since I picked up knitting again, I haven't really gone back to quilting, but quilting kind of was that stopgap, and it helped me play with color and helped me still feel involved in what I was in making things without necessarily doing that one craft and not being sad about not being able to knit. The third thing is to keep yourself connected to the community, keep your relationships going, keep connecting with others. And I feel like this can very much, pull you out of a rut or pull you out of a hole that you might be feeling like you're part of. So if you are in a guild or if you are in a weekly knitting meetup or something like that, right now we can participate in many of those things just over Zoom, just having these virtual meetups. And so even if you have nothing to show, even if you have nothing to work on at the moment, I still think it's beneficial to come and see what other people are making and see what other people are working on. And it doesn't take any extra energy, but it can give you a way of being inspired by other people around you. And you never know, one of those projects might inspire you to get going again. Number 4 is to kind of clear away all of the old stuff. I feel like there must be a saying about cutting away dead wood so that new wood can grow or something like that. But the idea of just clearing out stuff that you don't need anymore and getting rid of the weight of old projects, half-finished projects, abandoned projects, things that you don't need anymore. I feel like sometimes those things hold us back from being able to move forward with our projects. And finally, number 5 is the idea of finding the path of least resistance. Just find a way back into knitting or weaving or making or whatever it is that you want to do. Just find the easiest way back into those. And so that might be as easy as like knitting the simplest triangle shawl or the simplest asymmetrical shawl, just a garter stitch shawl, maybe 2 colors if you're feeling like you want a little bit of complexity, but just something that is really easy to get you going again. For me, I knit socks because socks are so easy. I can just knit them in my sleep. Literally, I can knit them in my sleep. I knit with my eyes closed, and it's just 60 stitches around, and I just keep going, and it just happens. And so finding something that is easy for you is a good way to just get back into it. So I'm going to show you a little bit about what has been going on with my knitting situation right now. Also what I did to get back into knitting after a few years of not knitting, because being a new mom, being tired, not knitting at all. I'll show you what I did to get back into knitting. So I don't even know what year it was anymore, but there was a year where Andrea Mowry's pattern Find Your Fade, that Find Your Fade shawl, was immensely popular. And everybody everywhere was making these Find Your Fade shawls. I saw them everywhere. They were beautiful. And it just seemed like such a simple thing to work on, because you start at a very, very tiny little cast on, and then you gradually grow this pattern a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger into this giant chevron. And so this pattern is what finally convinced me to pick up my needles and get back into knitting. At the time at SweetGeorgia, we were working on a new way of dyeing yarn in a low water immersion way to make kind of splashy colors. We had long been making hand-painted colorways, and so I wanted to make some multicolored colors without doing the hand painting aspect of it. So we were trying some new and different ways of dyeing. And so we came out with a palette that had things like splashy colors, like a splashy yellow color, splashy blue color, splashy purple color, and I decided I liked seeing them all together. So I wanted to knit them all together into one big, ginormous shawl. The Find Your Fade shawl, I think, is like 7 different skeins. It could be 9 different skeins. It could be as big as you want. I don't know how many skeins this was, but in any case, I started knitting this shawl, you just cast on at this tiny little corner and start making some increases. And for the most part, it is garter stitch. And then there's a little bit of lace here. And then what you do is you fade between one color and the next color. So you kind of alternate skeins until you combine for one section, and then you keep going. I'm sure all of you guys have seen this pattern. But this is my Find Your Fade shawl that I've never shown to anyone. But this is massive. And I don't know, I could count how many skeins are in here, but there's a lot of skeins. And I got to the part where I just kept knitting and knitting and knitting. And I got to the part where I was done. I didn't finish the shawl. I actually made a huge mistake, and I couldn't bear ripping back the section to fix it to then finally finish the shawl properly. So your Find Your Fade shawl, if you've ever made this, it will have finished into a proper, like it's like a crescent shape at the end of the day. When you finally make this chevron, it kind of tapers off into this chevron. I did not knit any of the tapered section. All I have here is the big chevron V, and that whole area that's missing here, that should taper off into a proper close, but I didn't knit any of that section. I just cast off because I was done. The whole purpose of this shawl, I felt like, was to just get me back into knitting. It was just to get me back into the feeling of making something and having some satisfaction of seeing this cloth being formed. And it didn't even matter what it was. It didn't matter that I didn't necessarily like these two colors blending together and how this all turned out. I didn't necessarily like any of that. But it didn't matter. In the end, all it was just getting my hands moving again so that I could get back into knitting. And so the fact that this is not finished doesn't bother me either. I'm going to wear it in any way. But what I am going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of an experiment, and I'm going to over dye the entire thing into a color. You can tell me what color you think I should do. I'm thinking some kind of magenta. But if you think that I should over dye it in blue or turquoise or green, I would love to hear what you think I should over dye this in, because you have to think, when you over dye something, you're adding a layer or a glaze of color over top the whole thing, and it is going to mix and combine with the colors that are already there. So if you put turquoise or blue on this with this sort of brownish, golden, beigey kind of color, you're going to get more brown and murky green colors. So to think about what all of these things will become if you were to layer it with a certain color. In any case, this is what I did to get back into knitting. This was a couple of years ago. Now, recently, I have been working on the Wild Autumn cardigan, which I have shown you guys. This is the stranded colorwork sweater that I've been working on. It's a cardigan designed by Abby Dahl. I've been working on this for some time now. I showed it to you guys before Christmas. And at the time I was working on the front section. I was just like at the beginning of one front section. And then over the holidays, I didn't knit hardly anything. I just didn't feel like it. And working now on this back section, I'm about this far from finishing the back. And then I can just knit sleeves and then we're done. But somebody left a comment for me last week and said, hey, where's that cardigan you're working on? It's been 2 months. What's happening with that? And this is what's happening with it. It's just that I didn't feel like knitting it because there were so many sort of decisions to make. It's a little bit hard on my hands. And so it was a little bit on hold. And I left it for, a little bit over the holidays and haven't worked on it. But I'll tell you what did finally get me back into feeling like working on this project, and that is that I started a pair of socks. So like I showed last week or the week before, those new double sock blanks that we have, where I wound each one into a small little center pull ball, I finally decided to just pick up and start knitting a sock with it. And these things, I feel like they almost knit themselves. This is a top-down sock, so I knit from the cuff down, turn the heel here, and now I'm knitting the foot, and then once that foot's finished, then I will knit the toe, and we are done one sock. And then with the other skein, the other ball of yarn, I'm going to do some different things with the color just to see how I can create some stripes, some variety, some gradient happening in there, a gradient within a gradient, something like that. But I feel like old habits really die hard. I have tried to learn different ways of knitting socks in the past couple of years, but at the end of the day, I go back to the same pattern that I have used since I started learning how to knit socks at the beginning, and it is the simplest thing ever. It's 60 stitches around. It's about an inch of 1x1 ribbing. I knit this leg part, and then I do a Dutch heel with a reinforced heel flap, and then I decrease all of those stitches for the foot, knit the toe, and we're done. And I don't know why. I've tried to knit toe-up socks. I've tried to knit all sorts of different kinds of socks, different kinds of heels. But at the end of the day, when I want to do something without having to think too much about it, this is what I do. And I think it's just because this is the first sock that I ever knit, and so, or this first sock pattern that I ever knit. And so this is why I always go back to this same thing. For me, this is the path of least resistance. This is the easiest thing that I can possibly knit. I can knit this while I watch TV, can knit in a movie theater, can knit in the car, and it just becomes the thing that gets me back into knitting. So that is basically it for today. I wonder if you have any suggestions or any recommendations for somebody who is going through like a little bit of a challenging spot, you know, feeling really out of it, feeling like they don't feel like making anything. What kind of advice would you give to that person? I think ultimately it's just to give yourself a break. Let yourself rest a bit. If you don't feel like it, there's no need to pressure yourself into doing it. But if there is a way to get you back into knitting, either through something that's really simple, something that's really easy, something that just helps you feel those stitches again and get back into the rhythm of doing it, anything that can help you get inspired, I think, is a good thing. So I would love to hear from you and see if you have any advice about this situation. So that is it for today. Thank you so much for being here. If you like this episode, please do hit the like button. And if you would like to see more content like this, we come here every week to talk about knitting and spinning and weaving and dyeing. I would love to see you guys back here again next time. So please do hit subscribe. We'll be back next Friday with more content. So I hope to see you then. Thanks. Bye for now.